As a high school counselor, my late Mays and early Junes were filled to capacity with monitoring at-risk seniors. Years of second chances and interventions converged in what we hoped would be the fourth and final year of school for some of our students who, through some combination of ability, expectations, circumstances, and stubbornness, found themselves at the precipice of not graduating from high school. Around late April, we would meet as a guidance team and share our lists, each of us with about 20 to 25% of our senior caseload at risk for not graduating on time. One by one, as graduation neared, students would do enough to reach academic security and no longer require our monitoring. And thus our list would synthesize down to a handful of names with complicated graduation plans and even more complicated life stories. In a school year built to accommodate 8 credits, some needed as many as 12 to graduate, requiring a full course load and supplemental credit recovery. For them, this year would be overwhelming, but at the very least, possible. I spent my days walking the halls of our school checking in with these students, and my nights at home worrying about whether or not they'd even be in school the next day. How much more would it take to get them where they needed to be? When would this all prove to be too much? A sense of urgency marked our interactions as everything became high stakes. Every absence, every discipline referral, every missing assignment could be the difference between walking across a graduation stage or not. This evolving and increasingly messy list of names imprinted on my brain to the point of me memorizing their constantly changing course averages to 2 decimal places, to my feet carrying me hundreds of miles through the halls of our school, checking in with and occasionally chasing down students who sometimes seemed shockingly indifferent about graduating from high school. I maintained an internal confidence barometer of who seemed eager to get their name off of my list and onto a diploma, and who instead seemed content to continue pushing a button marked self-destruct. See, when you and I graduated from high school, it likely felt like the next instinctive step in pursuit of a fulfilling life that we had long anticipated for ourselves. But for some students, the ones that teetered on the edge of uncertainty until the very end, the ones that begged you, give up on me, because everyone else in my life sure has, and I long ago gave up on myself. Those are the students that demanded that you dig deeper. Because if you did, they might just find themselves someday standing on a graduation stage, struck by the sudden realization that they were actually always built to do bigger things. Sometimes, in spite of our most committed efforts, they still wouldn't make it. But most of the time, they did. People might not realize that this is what dropout prevention work can look like. It's an exhaustive process that requires unconditional positive regard, relentlessness, and above all, hope. In my 4 years as a counselor, our 4-year cohort graduation rate grew from 86% to 94% in the school serving a socioeconomically and racially diverse student body. And depending on who you ask, this number is either cause for celebration or evidence of a controversy, as getting here is messy. It involves a healthy dose of second chances and credit recovery options that some see as a cheapening of a high school diploma. They'll argue that we should let them fail. Now, I think it's important to emphasize that the processes that I've described here do indeed allow students to fail. In the year that 94% of our students started with us as freshmen and walked across a graduation stage 4 years later, it still meant that 24 of them did not, perhaps eager to get started on what they had always presumed would be their ultimate, underwhelming destiny. And in a school where any of our students wind up like this, do any of us have any cause for celebration at all? See, I allowed my students to fail, but I did not allow them to see failure as inevitability. Jalen and I met in his sophomore year when he came to enroll with me from alternative school. He'd been sent there the year before due to compounding disciplinary infractions. He promised me that he was eager to do better, and of course, I believed him. He quickly found himself falling into familiar patterns of misbehavior, with the primary issue of walking out of class when he would get angry and wandering the halls of our school to cool down. And so in response to this, we built in an accommodation where he could come and see me for up to 5 minutes at a time to de-escalate if he found himself getting frustrated in class. He just had to ask his teacher first. Consequently, we found ourselves talking about his life, about where he came from and where he was headed, about what it was like to grow up poor, to have a dad who only came around when it was convenient, to always feel like nobody believed in him. Turns out Jalen had plenty to be angry about. Over time, his grades increased, his disciplinary referrals decreased, and the student I would have fully expected to be on my at-risk list come senior year was nowhere close to it. And shame on me for ever assuming otherwise. Jalen showed up to his graduation ceremony in the wrong kind of shoes. I swapped my size 10 Oxfords for his Jordans and watched him use them to walk across the stage from the life that he had inherited into the one that he had built for himself. And as he did, I looked down at his shoes on my feet. And it was the most impactful moment of my career as an educator because he and I had changed each other. What Jalen and the majority of our at-risk students had in common is that they grew up in or near poverty. Our most common metric for measuring this in schools is our free and reduced lunch rate, which represents a subsidy that students receive when their parents make up to a certain percentage of the federal threshold for poverty. In the year that 94% of our students graduated, 38% of them received free and reduced lunch subsidies. Nationally, at low poverty schools, where 25% or fewer students receive free and reduced lunch, 91% of the seniors graduate on time every year. Contrast that with high poverty schools, where 75% or more students receive free and reduced lunch subsidies, and only 68% of the senior class graduates on time every year, not to mention the ones that drop out before that. Now, if you're asking me, this is evidence of our real controversy. Our school sat right in the pocket of this striking void between high and low poverty institutions, a true mixed income school. My at-risk list typically numbered around 15 students per year, and most of those were economically disadvantaged. Had our school been high poverty, that list might have been closer to 30, 45, maybe even more, as matriculating in a mixed income school has been shown to expose students to better resources, higher quality instruction, a more involved PTA, and the richness of a school experience that students deserve, but often miss at higher poverty schools. Had our list doubled, tripled, or more, then our time and energy would have inevitably worn thin. And our interventions that had facilitated such progress would have increasingly fallen victim to truancy, delinquency, academic failure, and eventually school dropout. Psychological residue that increasingly comes when we concentrate poverty in our schools. In my brief time as an educational practitioner and researcher, I've come to understand that there are no magic bullets for fixing the problems that we face in our public education system. Still, I do believe that there's two things that we could do that can make a big difference. One very difficult and one very easy. First, we have to stop allowing for the concentration of poverty in our schools. The socioeconomic integration of our students doesn't erase the effects of poverty, but it does change the circumstances surrounding it. Exposing these students to better resources and more individualized attention could be life-altering. Add them to my list, instead of keeping them on one that's so long it may make little sense to even keep one at all. Now, this work requires fierce commitment in the face of fierce opposition, as families of children who already receive a high-quality education often exude much louder political will than the families of children who so desperately need better educational opportunities. And thus, this work is very hard. But continuing to allow for the socioeconomic segregation of our students is a gratuitous endorsement of an out-of-sight, out-of-mind approach to education. The second thing we can do is much simpler. We have to notice these students. I don't mean just recognizing that there's particular challenges facing low-income students. There are. I mean investing in knowing more about their lives. Being excited when they do well in an assignment and surprised if they fail one. Missing them when they're absent from school, welcoming them home when they return. Finding out what excites them, even if it isn't school. Acknowledging that getting a free lunch doesn't mean the food in the cafeteria doesn't still seriously suck sometimes. Sitting with them in the office when they get in trouble. Believing them when they say they want to do better, and listening to them when they feel like they've been treated unfairly. Getting to know their families, helping them to expect more for themselves. Recognizing that graduation isn't always a presumed outcome for all students, but helping them believe that it should be. Indulging in selfies after the graduation ceremony and getting right back to work the next day with the students who didn't get to be a part of it. Because while I've come to understand that all solutions don't work for all students, I've come to believe that all solutions start with noticing someone. When we start here, our graduation rates mean nothing and everything at the same time because the percentage is just a number. But that list of names I carried with me through the halls of our school was a list of lives that could turn in any way, at any moment. On a June morning, I collected my list of names and embarked on a conquest through the halls of our school to help students graduate. My first name was a girl I had talked to the day before on the phone who had missed school. She promised me she would be here today, and of course, I believed her. And so I walked up to her first period class and appeared in the door, scanned the room, and ultimately found that she wasn't there. Dejected, I stepped back, feeling overwhelmed by the gravity of this work and naive for once again hoping for progress and only finding another empty chair. Looking up, I noticed a series of quotes posted above the door because this teacher had asked her students to write down a message that they had heard from a teacher or a mentor in their lifetime that had stuck with them. The shortest one struck me in particular. I looked down at my list, saw my next name, walked ahead. Thank you so much.